Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Every Rockie Ever, a Colorado Rockies podcast, part of the Rocky Mountain Rooftop Network, a proud member of the Fans First Sports Network. I am your host, Skyler Timmins, joined always here by my older brother, Dustin, wearing his Rockies gear, as always, in his basement. And we have a special guest today. We're not alone this time. We have our very own beat writer, manager over at DNVR Rockies, our good friend of the show, Patrick Lyons. Patrick, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for inviting me. When I got the message, I said, yes, please. I've been waiting for this ever since this podcast began, ever since the concept first got floated out there. I was excited to talk about some of my favorite Rockies because you guys have such a fun time and such an informative time about all the great players in Rockies history. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there's Dustin is like right at the top of there supporting this whole thing. He was always feeding me Rockies to do. And then you were right there as well, always telling me about Drew Goodman being a fan of the show or a fan of the account and everything. So we appreciate all your insights and everything and participation and interaction with it. It's greatly appreciated. And as a result today, that's why we wanted to have you on the show, because you had a couple of players that you wanted to talk about. I'll give you the whole history of the Rockies, and it came down to a couple of players that we'll talk about today. First, the legendary pinch hitter, John Vander, and we'll also talk about one of the Rockies' legendary closers, Brian Fuentes. And before we get into it, Patrick, just give us a quick history. What's been your history as a Rockies fan? And like, what's gotten you into the team, and why do you continue to even cover it now as a profession?
Well, when the Rockies came about in 1993, I had probably one of the first shirts that was available. And that was actually thanks to my Aunt Pat, who we just celebrated her 75th birthday over the weekend. And, you know, she had one of the first hats and one of the first shirts, actually, even when it said Colorado, the arch, and it was gray. And of course, now we know it to be black. So I don't think I still have that shirt, unfortunately. But with my family down in Colorado Springs, I would always come out each and every summer before I officially lived in Colorado. So I'd always, you know, had the Rockies as one of my favorite teams to root for, even on the East Coast. And, you know, going to Coors Field for the first time was just, you know, implanted into my brain as just this amazing experience. The first experience was being in the parking lot and then having to get on the tram or walking a long way just to get to the little, you know, ferry, or not ferry, but the trolley bus, if you will. And just sitting in right field and watching Larry Walker. And, you know, like, full disclaimer, I like really bad teams. So I'm kind of enjoying the 2023 season. Like, as a huge baseball fan, you know, it's easy, I think, for some sports fans to root for teams that are really good. That's easy. But if you're a sports fan, can you root for a team or follow a team that's really bad? It's a little bit harder. That's where I kick into overdrive, and I almost enjoy it more when things are bad, because that's where the real diehards are. And that's what we experience at the DNVR Rockies podcast, is that it's only the diehards. So kind of when things are bad, they're good. And so John Vander, of course, had to be my guy from the get-go in the 90s, like someone who hardly ever played, but yet every time he did, he made an impact. And I think the same was true in the 2000s with Brian Fuentes, a guy who, again, got overlooked, was an all-star, you know, multiple times. But the guys who are the underdogs are the ones that are kind of the most fun to root for. Like, there's nothing wrong with, you know, rooting for Troy Tulowitzki, Nolan Arenado, all those guys, of course. But it's what's kind of beneath that surface, beneath the star power of some of those players, where it gets fun to, like, root for those guys, because they're just guys. They're not stars. And so Vander was that first one, and seeing him always make an impact. Brian Fuentes kind of being that underdog guy in the back of the bullpen and getting acknowledged for it at least a little bit. And some current guys, of course, that, you know, if it, depending on how the conversation devolves, we can talk about Johan Flande and more recent vintage Tim Melville, Josh Fuentes, and Jose Iglesias. Jose Iglesias, to me, was like watching Royce Clayton, you know, back in circa 2003, I think it was. So that was like watching that in modern time. So, but going back, it was Vander and Fuentes.
That's awesome. And this will be nice because we have the advantage of both you and Dustin being more active and alive during that time. Whereas I was I'm the youngster in the group here. But let's hop into John Vander Wal, and I'll throw it over to Dustin as always, kind of give us that career overlook of John Vander Wal, a pinch hitting legend for the Rockies.
Oh yeah, John Vander Wal. I always love when hearing his name announced and everything. But as we said, he was that pinch hitter specialist, but he also played outfield and backed up at first base. He's from Grand Rapids, Michigan, and he was originally drafted by the Astros in the 8th round in 1984 out of high school, but didn't go, and then was drafted by the Montreal Expos in the 3rd round of the 87 draft out of Western Michigan University. And so he made his major league debut in 1991. And then he came over to the Rockies in that 94 season and played until 1998. And then he went on to play for several other teams in that same role, being pinch hitter. A couple times when he got to Pittsburgh, got in a ton of games, and that's where he ended his season in 2004. Is when he was done playing as a member of the Cincinnati Reds.
So pretty long longevity of a career, 14 seasons in the big leagues, more or less, but pretty interesting there. Looking down, we can focus in on that Rockies career. Joins the Rockies in 1994, comes over from Montreal, along with good times over there. So, what is it about John Vander Wal and his Rockies career that kind of stuck out to you guys? We'll start with Dustin here. What stuck out to you about John Vander Wal?
Well, like Patrick said earlier, when John Vander Wal's name was called in those later innings of the game, you knew that something could happen. He was going to get on base, or he was going to put the ball in play, get a base hit in whatever form. He wasn't going to blast the third deck, walk off homer. He could, but it was always getting on base, and we definitely saw that in that 95 season. And I always feel like the old timer because I've been a diehard since 93, and all the video games, like everybody was playing the 2000 video games, and I was still stuck with my Super Nintendo, like MLB PA baseball. And so all of those players in those early 90s, those are my guys, and John Vander Wal in the game that I had, he was still with the Expos, and he'd tear it up there with all of them. But that was always my thing, and I always thought we got a solid backup first baseman and that left-handed bat off the bench that you could just count on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you mentioned, Dustin, being a member of the Expos kind of gave you an extra bit of clout of like, okay, this guy's got some energy. Like that actually had a lot of value and cachet of like, okay, this guy is already, we know he's underappreciated because he's playing north of the border. His team doesn't appreciate him. He was basically cut because I think he was going into arbitration. And so basically they're like, yeah, we just don't want to pay you, $1 million or whatever he would have made. It wouldn't even surprise me if he was supposed to make less than $1 million there with the Expos. And so Rockies purchased his contract, and then, he kind of does the caddy thing for Larry Walker. And so, being part of that Expos team was huge. And as you said, Dustin, the first year in 95 sets a franchise record that I don't know. It's actually an MLB record, 28 pinch hits in 1995. Next closest is Greg Norton with 23. You can even look at Ichiro. So like modern day record, if anyone's going to break a modern day record for hits, and in this case, pinch hits, you'd think it'd be Ichiro, 27 in 2017. Falls short of John Vander Wal. We talk about the greatest records of all time. This is the one that might not ever get broken. 28 pinch hits in a single season. Mark Sweeney said this back at one of the Sabre conventions in San Diego in 2019, a guy who also has a couple pinch hit records for the Rockies. But he was basically the 25th man on the roster. He was the last guy on the bench where, look, you're just going to come in late, face the opposing team's closer in a big spot, wherever the pitcher is hitting. Well, we don't have rosters now where you can just carry a guy who's only going to come off the bench and hit and just maybe provide a little bit of defense. You have to be a lot more dynamic than that. So that's essentially like a position that doesn't exist anymore. So the 28 pinch hits in 95 end up leading to 79 pinch hits during his 5 years, another one of those unbreakable franchise records in Rockies history.
Yeah, and you think of just the difficulty of pinch hitting, of you're a lot of coming off cold off the bench. Maybe you've taken some hacks down in the dugout, but you're coming in facing a closer, usually with a game on the line, ton of pressure. And to see guys like John Vander or previous guys we've talked about, Jason Giambi, we just recently talked about, Seth Smith, some of those guys that come off the bench and then make an impact when you really only have one swing in the tank, one opportunity to make a difference. And he took the most of it, which is, like you said, Patrick, that's something that just isn't happening today anymore in today's game with the DH and just less subbing in, pinch hitting opportunities. But back in those 90s, John Vander, best of the best, right there in 1995, which is really tough to do. Let's say right here in that 95 season, slash line batted .347, .432 on base, and a .594 slugging percentage, had an OPS plus of 142. And that was all in 105 games, 101 at-bats in total. So for him to put up that much production in such a small sample size is truly incredible. And that 95 team, I wish I had been alive to see it because it sounded exciting.
If only they would have been able to pitch consistently that year. But something I just like going through some of the pictures and stuff, it being in my mind, the hairstyle of John Vander with that like baby mullet-ish, like bleach blonde hair, kind of frilling in the back. Disgusting, but so legit.
Disgusting is a compliment here from Dustin. So I get that. Yes, that's definitely a compliment. Like you said, Skyler, like in 95, they go to the postseason, and you're not going to be able to do that if Vander is not contributing in the way he was able to. 4 of those 79 total pinch hits that he hit with the Rockies were actually home runs. So Mark Sweeney has the a franchise record for most in a career. He hit 5, but the 4 that Vander he hit, one of them. Talk about going against closers. Talk about Hall of Fame closer in Dennis Eckersley back in 96. That next year, he hits a walk-off 3-run home run, and at the time in 96, that was only the 5th walk-off home run at the time in franchise history in their first 4 years. And my favorite part is, anytime somebody does something notable, whether it's a player of the week or a player of the month, is looking at the class of player that they are in to get an idea, either, again, just how electric that person was at that period of time, or how much they might not fit in a sense, but still you were able to do it. The first 10 walk-off home runs in franchise history were, get this, Ellis Burks, Dante Bichette, Burks, Vinny Castilla, John Vander, Dante Bichette, Larry Walker, Bichette, Castilla. A lot of the guys that we know, a lot of the Blake Street Bombers, and our guy, or maybe just my guy, John Vander.
And that's the cool part about looking through these guys, like you mentioned. No, they're not the stars. No, they're not the superstars. How many people are wearing a John Vander jersey to a Rockies game, or even own one at the moment? But he had those impacts in those little moments. And it's cool that the things that stuck with you. When I was trying to look up footage, what popped up, that home run against Dennis Eckersley, or another one that I found where put the Rockies up 14-12 against the Dodgers in the 9th inning. And so late in game, and there's very few highlights for some of these guys, but the ones you do find, man, they were impactful. And was there anything about his approach, his stance that stuck out to you, or that's memorable to you about John Vander?
No, not exactly. I mean, just a left-handed swing is always going to be unique. And as someone who played wiffle ball growing up religiously, and I was a switch hitter, but it would usually just be one year I was batting right-handed for the entire season. And then the next year lefty felt better. So, but when I played wiffle ball, I could just go from side to side. So when I would, come up with my fantasy teams, and whether I was the Expos or the 93 White Sox, where it was a big one for me at the time with Bo Jackson and Robin Ventura and Frank Thomas and all those guys, being able to hit left-handed was always helpful. So, Vander swing was just so nice. And in my head, I remember it as looking a lot like Larry Walker's. He was a little bit smaller than Larry Walker, but not too much. Just Walker was just so athletic and was so muscular. But in my head, that the swings almost seem similar. They've become one and the same. It's as if they're twins, and it's Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito. Except Danny DeVito can hit really well late in the game against another team's closer. So it was John Vander Wel's my Danny DeVito is what I'm saying. Compliment.
It works. Looking at that footage, and Dustin can chime in on this, a really simple approach at the plate, especially one of those classic 90s swings, just nice and simple, squared up in the box, and a nice simple swing. And how important is that, as a coach, you've coached born and playing in college, that importance of just a simple approach at the plate like that?
Well, yeah, he actually, looking back at stuff, he totally reminded me. I watching John Vander Wal, these highlights and stuff to do our research. I was thinking, like, he looks so familiar to somebody else, and it was a guy I played with at Sishu Pueblo, same left-handed batter. He was our best hitter and one of the top in the RMAC. And I was looking, and I had to go try to dig up some footage of Jason Phobes from Longmont. He had, holy cow, there he is. But that simple approach, especially, I think John Vander Wal had so much success with that easy approach to put the bat on the ball. And especially in those the early Coors Field days, that's all you had to do. Put the bat on the ball and put it in play. And then let altitude or whatever take the rest. And, that's that consistency. And it was cool to see in his career later on when he finally got a starting position. It wasn't till 2000 with the Pirates. And, he did pretty good. He hit 278 with it. And so you see, he was a consistent guy throughout that major league career.
Mm-hmm. And looking through his stats, something that sticks out is you find that a lot more in the 90s too, of just his good of a plate of approach, good plate discipline and vision at the plate. Just looking at his 95 stats, when he was ahead in the count, he was slugging .615, had a .385 average. So as soon as he gets ahead in the count, even account, when he's ahead, he's aggressive early on, hits the pitches that he wants, and that leads to that success. And like most people, when he falls behind, then it doesn't go as well. But aggressive early in the count, or able to draw the walk, and then pass the torch off to the next guy to go on and win the game for you. So, and then again, that's another thing, coming off the bench to do that, super impressive.
Yeah, of course, pre-humidor time, so you almost just had to put the bat on the ball. And it's funny because that's something that Matt Holliday, when he came back in 2018, was telling a lot of the young guys, David Dahl in particular, and at least worked for the next season for Dahl in 2019, where he was an all-star. But just basically just meet the ball. Like, the pitcher is providing so much of that power that you don't have to hit a home run. Now, that might be something you need to do in a home run derby where, it's not coming in as hot. Obviously, it's a much closer distance, but still, the pitcher is providing so much of that power. Going back to highlights in the 90s, I'll never forget when McGuire hit one off of Randy Johnson, and you're like, okay, this ball's never going to come down because of just how fast it was coming in and how fast it was going out. Well, if the guys are throwing, in the mid to upper 90s, which they've really been doing since 2018, you really just need to meet that ball. And in 95, that was exactly what, John Vander Wal was able to do in that work stoppage shortened season. So, he's got the franchise and MLB record with 28 pinch hits. How many more would he have had if they actually played 162? So, we might have to prorate that. And if anyone ever beats that record, if anyone gets to 29, we're going to have to put an asterisk next to it. And we may need Billy Crystal to do a documentary on it.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, then too, with that, throughout his whole career, he was a great pinch hitter. He's number 7 all time with 129 pinch hits in his career. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. And you think of how many great hitters have been in the history of Major League Baseball, and for him to be in the top 7 in that category says a lot about just how he was as a hitter, and made his mark in Major League history despite only having a few seasons where he was actually got opportunity to start. And so there's always a place for everybody in baseball. They can always carve out their own path.
It's really nice that he was able to, I'm not going to say get his plaudits, but get some recognition for what he provided to a team, because he was able to play a little bit in the 1998 World Series with the San Diego Padres. Of course, that did not go well for them at all against one of the greatest teams of all time, the 1998 New York Yankees. But even still, just contributing to that, as he did to the Rockies in '95 to get them to their first ever postseason, helping the Padres get to their second ever World Series, was nice for him to really have that moment as soon as he left the Rockies.
Mm-hmm. And he's continued to do that today, looking around. He's dabbled in scouting. He's been doing coaching. Like 2018, he was with the Whitecaps. So he's continued to go on and continue that career of teaching, coaching, and everything. So it's pretty cool to see that the guys that can pave a career for themselves, make a name for themselves, carve out a place for themselves to continue to contribute and make an impact and help teach the next generation of players. Pretty interesting stuff. Any last thoughts here on John Vander Wal before we swap gears?
No, I mean, I think we covered. I'm sure there'll be 15 things that come into our heads as soon as you do this all the time, Skyler, and you're probably like, oh, I forgot to mention this thing and I forgot to mention that thing. So I'm sure that'll happen for us in general. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say, I was looking up some numbers, and I found out that he took part in a couple back-to-back home runs, like 3 in a row. The second one ever, Bichette, Vander Wal, Castilla. So I thought that was neat. And then Burks, Vander Wal, Castilla. And so I was like, well, wait a minute. Is he like the unlikeliest candidate to ever be a part of 3 consecutive home runs?
Mm-hmm.
And not really. It's actually happened for a couple guys. Neifi Perez, you're like, oh, all right. That's interesting. Greg Norton, who is another one of those kind of pinch hit specialists or guys off the bench. Angel Echeverria did it. And then maybe the most unlikeliest player to ever be a part of back-to-back-to-back home runs in Rockies history has to be Ron Gant. He hit 2 of them in his 3 months with the team, had 2 other back-to-back jacks with Todd Helton. And so 4 of his 8 home runs came some kind of back-to-back situation for Ron Gant. So shout out to Ron Gant, but still, John Vander Wal, 3 back-to-back-to-back home runs that he was a part of. I like that.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet. Yeah, like you said, we can always keep the conversation going, and if people think of things, and share them with us on Twitter and wherever you can find the podcast in the comments and everything. 'Cause, yeah, we all have these stories, and we'll always think of something with them. But that's your challenge, Patrick. You can get yourself a John Vander Wal City Connect. Here,
I mean, I got it. Like that's the thing is any name on the back of a City Connect is going to look excellent, especially with one of the old school guys. We have a running joke on the DNVR Rockies podcast. If you have a Todd Hollandsworth City Connect jersey, you will get a free beer from either me or Susie. But yeah, if you have a John Vander Wal size large City Connect or even if it's a jersey, bring it my way. You will get GOAT status from me.
You just got to go hit up one of those Chinese websites, Patrick. You'll get it in 6 months. But that's John Vander Wal, and we're going to swap gears now for another guy in important late game situations coming out of the bullpen in the T-Rex himself, Brian Fuentes. And Patrick, what is it about Brian Fuentes that has stuck out to you so much?
Yeah, I think just anytime you have a guy as a late inning shutdown reliever, which obviously, he was a closer for many years, but even what he was able to do, I think it was, in 2007 at the time, I really, liked Fuentes. And then it was only until the story started coming out about how much of a team player he was. And the fact that, he was the closer and, had conversations with manager Clint Hurdle about his role. And he said, no, we got to win these games. And Manny's the guy. Manny Corpus is the one who should be closing games out. And so he was happy to step aside for the betterment of the team and look at it as an opportunity at that time to say, hey, you know what, there could be more important at bats earlier in the game. And so, you know what, maybe we can have two closers, but I'm just going to come in the 7th or 8th, whatever it may be. So for him to be that selfless at that time was, when I heard about that, like, wow, all right. So he's not only been impressive as a 3-time All-Star with the Rockies, the only pitcher to have multiple All-Star games with the Rockies from 2005 through 2007. Like, that just kind of elevated him in my mind, and everything that he was able to do in late games just kind of put him as, like, you know what, again, not an obvious choice from that 2017. I mean, you could probably name 10 other guys that might be more exciting, because sometimes just getting the final 3 outs isn't exciting in and of itself. The moment is exciting, but there's nothing terribly exciting about outs number 25, 26, and 27. But Brian Fuentes, you know what? He was my guy during that time.
That's awesome. All right, we'll hand it over to Dustin. Give us his career lowdown for Brian Fuentes.
Brian Fuentes, our lefty reliever, and he's a California kid. He was drafted by the Mariners in the 25th round in 1995, and he ended up making his major league debut June 2nd, 2001. And he played his last game in 2012. So he was with the Rockies for 7 years, for 7 seasons, from 2002 until 2008. And during that time, like you guys have been saying, one of the best closer that the Rockies have had, multiple All-Star games, and that unique delivery, the arm slot. That's what I'll just go ahead and say. That's my biggest thing with Brian Fuentes. He's another guy. A few episodes back when we talked about Kurt Manwaring, during Kurt Manwaring days, he just bugged me to no end. I don't know what it was about him, but every time I was like, oh, Kurt Manwaring, oh. And for Brian Fuentes, at times I was like, oh, it's Fuentes. Like, I don't know why, because you look at his stats and everything he accomplished with the Rockies, he was pretty good. But for some reason, I would take a bad outing that summed up his whole career for me at times, even though he was really good. And that's my Brian Fuentes, and that, I called him the pizza slinger. Like, I think we had like an old like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game or something, and you put a pizza in a hand or something, and it like flung it, and it just, because I remember Skyler was like, "Why do you call him that? Like, why do you say that?" And so that weird kind of sidearm T-Rex, and just like a frisbee, flinged it in there, and he was pretty good. Good old Brian Fuentes.
And what's notable too, being that lefty closer, I think is what kind of helps stand out with him in his career. 2001 makes his debut with Seattle, and then gets traded to the Rockies prior to 2002, along with Jose Panagoya and Denny Stark, and to Jeff, in exchange for Jeff Cirillo. So Cirillo goes over to the Mariners, and the Rockies get those 3 players. And who comes out on top is probably the best acquisition out of that, Brian Fuentes. And it's cool to see that in his career, where he eventually takes over the closer role in 2005, his first All-Star season, put up 31 saves, put up at least 20 saves from 2005 to 2008 with the Rockies, 30 saves in 3 of those seasons. So pretty cool career there for him in a Rockies uniform. And Patrick, share a little bit more, I guess, your experience and memories of Brian Fuentes as well, of what made him so effective as a closer or a reliever in general.
Yeah, he just was ice cold in the veins. And again, we talk so much about what it's like pitching at altitude and how you don't get any support. And, it's sort of, I imagine there should be a different statistic for Rockies closers where, okay, it's, it's like a 3-run lead, or the tying runs at home plate, whatever it may be. It should change a little bit. And so, who knows how many saves that Brian Fuentes would have had if you adjust for Coors Field. But, dude still had, I want to say 115 career saves. So he had the most in franchise history, which is impressive for a left-hander. And he was just consistent. And, you know, when you can rely on a guy like that late in a game, it makes things just all the more easier to watch a game, at least when your team's up, like the 2023 Rockies. I think they've only lost 2 games when leading after 8 innings. So, you know, the bullpen's been one of the strengths of this year's team. And so you feel a lot more confident late in those games that you're going to win them and that it's not going to be frustrating. And, you know, in 2005 and 2006, you know, 2, you know, other not so great seasons until you're finally able to break through in 2007. And the irony of it is, again, he wasn't even the closer at that time after having lost his role after the All-Star break to Manny Corpus. So again, it's just what he was able to bring as far as consistency in the 9th inning and doing it really well. You know, one of the records that he has is lowest ERA for any Rockies pitcher with at least 300 innings pitched. So a 3.38 ERA is, again, really impressive at Coors Field at a time where, sure, the humidor might have been in play, but there were runs still being scored by the bunches. You know, it was still kind of that tail end of the, you know, PED era. So, you know, 3.38 looks even more dominant. And even after he left Colorado, you know, we talked plenty about what DJ LeMahieu was able to do. Talk about a Michigan kid, just like John Vander was, to make a connection. But what LeMahieu was able to do going to another team and having success and saying, oh, wow, look at that. We saw what Carlos Estevez was able to do this year as being an all-star. Brian Fuentes did that too. When he went over to the Angels, he was also an all-star. He was a 3-time all-star with the Rockies, but a 4-time all-star in his career. So he was still able to have that success. It wasn't some kind of strange Coors Field creation that for some reason this guy can save games in Colorado and when he's with the Rockies, and then as soon as he goes somewhere else, he can't do that. That wasn't the case at all. He was still able to have a really lengthy career, 12 years, you know, played about 5 more years after his time with the Rockies. So just that kind of consistency when, you know, the Rockies hadn't had a ton of guys that were able to do that late in games. They've always had relievers that have been underappreciated. That's just been an ongoing theme. I think no one appreciated Steve Reed at the time. And now, of course, we all look back and the greatest reliever ever, right? Mm-hmm. But at least at that time, we were able to recognize somewhat how good Fuentes was during the mid-2000s for Colorado.
Mm-hmm. You think of the history of Colorado closers, and it seems like Brian Fuentes has kind of had that longest tenure. You know, most saves in a career for the Rockies, and for a while he's like in that top 10 for a season, saves in a season. And when you think of the great closers, it always falls to Rafael Betancourt or Houston Street, Jose Jimenez, some of those guys, Sean Chacon. Some of those guys out there. And I think like Brian Fuentes kind of falls under that radar. And it could be like what Dustin mentioned. You take those bad outings and maybe that's how you define his career, as opposed to looking at that bigger picture of, actually, no, this dude was pretty legit for a closer in Colorado coming from the left side, even with that funky delivery.
Well, that's what's crazy looking at those stats. That the ERA alone just jumps at what? Rockies pitcher with a sub-4 ERA? What? You know, he pitched 410 in the 3rd innings, and he had 470 strikeouts. I just saw a thing for Trevor May with the Oakland Athletics where he just got his 500th career strikeout. And like, holy cow, we had a reliever that did that in, you know, the few years that he was there. You know, it's once again, like slapping myself, like he was good. Just accept it and celebrate him. Because I never hated him, but I never give him what he deserves as a diehard. My respect, and I love Brian Fuentes. You know what he did, and especially he's part of that Rocktober group. And like Patrick's saying, when the wheels fell off and Manny Corpus was red hot, all right, do your thing. And then when Corpus the next year fell apart, Fuentes came back in and slinging it in there. And after when he went to the Angels, it wasn't that just he went over to the Angels and, wow, you're an all-star. He had to take over for Francisco Rodriguez, who was pretty good closer. And what does Fuentes do? He goes and saves 46 games or 48. Holy cow!
Yeah, led the league.
Pretty damn good. Yeah, it's what's funny is his numbers at Coors Field in his career are great, just a little bit higher than his career area, but 3.48 ERA in 231 games, 227 and 2/3 innings pitched at Coors Field. Really impressive. And in that 2007 season, he had a 1.72 ERA. So, I mean, I when you look at it like that, you go, yeah, why was there ever any question about him closing out games? But still, was really solid, as we said, second most appearances. Converted 21 saves in a row at one point back in 2006. Third most in franchise history in a single season. Also has the fifth longest consecutive saves in a row with 17 in 2008. It was actually, it's funny because on Wednesday, Rockies got 2 hit. They were able to score a run thanks to CJ Cron's homer, but they got 2 hit, and the first ever 1-hit shutout in franchise history. They had to wait over a decade, 2006, and Fuentes was actually a part of that. Oddly enough, it was against Oakland, but just you can't say enough about a guy like that. And we hope to see him back at the ballpark. This has been the 30th anniversary. And, I think throughout the month of July and maybe it was early June that we had some of the legends start coming back. But, and I know you guys are kind of on the same page as I am, as far as the Rockies needing to do more with their players and bringing them back and acknowledging them and having some kind of Hall of Fame. So I hope that Fuentes is going to make some kind of appearance at the ballpark before this season is over.
Yeah, I know before the season here in 2023, right before, in spring training, he was there hanging out with the players, and they kind of under the rug put a video out there of him talking about being back and hanging out with the players. And it would be cool to see them celebrate guys like that even more. A franchise leader in a lot of aspects and played an important role. And even looking through more stuff, remember that he was the focal point of a classic Rockies commercial of him Fuentes saving, where he's being a lifeguard and I think somebody's choking and comes by and gives him the Heimlich and does things like that. So it's classic things that they could be doing with these players to bring them back. And we've talked about this before, bring back player commercials in a way. That it's cool to see that he's had this impact, and he probably falls under people's radars, that they forget about Brian Fuentes after all these years, that they forget about him. When we talk about Daniel Bard and how much of an impact he's had as a reliever for the Rockies and in that closer role, Fuentes was that kind of guy too, making that impact, and underrated in a lot of aspects. And it's cool to see that there's these memories that you guys have of him, that he was important. He was a critical piece of those Rockies teams, and some bad ones too in that 2005 season. Interesting to note, he was the first ever Rockies reliever named an All-Star. First ever Rocky. I think he was the third pitcher ever, but the very first reliever named to the All-Star game, which incredible feat that we've talked about before. A reliever at Coors Field that's an All-Star. What the heck? They had a couple that could have been this year. They've had them in the past. And for him to be that very first one is pretty special at the age of 29. So he really got to hit that stride right there in the prime of his life, right there in his time with the Rockies. And shame he kind of bounced around in that last part of his career after with the Angels. But overall, still a super, super solid career in total that deserves celebration.
And I think, Skyler, something too that as we talk about these players, because there's certain ones like the ones today that made an impact in Patrick's life, of his Rockies life. And part of it for us, we grew up only listening to Rockies on the radio. So we didn't always have that mental picture, that image of what these players looked like. But once I was out in college and had TV and access to cable or whatever, and I was watching Rockies games every day. But the Brian Fuentes appearance too, his little goatee, his dark goatee, he kind of had the underbite ish when he'd come set and he's looking in kind of the, just staring down in there. That's a mental image. When I think of Brian Fuentes, it takes me back to, I know exactly what he looks like. that delivery, like we said. And does it really matter in things? No, but that's why he has a special place in my Rockies life. As I could pick him out of any, we put him in a line, and boom, that's Brian Fuentes. I know it because of this characteristic, this, that, and the other. And that's what's fun being a diehard fan is we do that. Or they come up in the immaculate grid and we're like, that's a Rockies guy right there. That's, or whatever. And I think that's part of the magic of what we're doing. And especially this 30-year anniversary of the Rockies. Like, who are these guys that you remember? The guys that aren't the blockbuster, like, this is the guy, this is the Hall of Fame guy. No, this is Brian Fuentes. It was a foundational piece to a successful Rockies bullpen pitcher. John Vander being a legit foundational piece of how to pinch hit. And when we look at it, the percentage of major league ball players that actually have that kind of longevity, it's almost microscopic. But then there's our guys like the Mark Littles and the Greg Nortons for the short time he was with the Rockies, and the Mark Sweeneys. Those are the guys that we do this podcast for, because it does mean a whole lot to actually wear a major league uniform. And being part of the Rockies, I think it's an awesome feat. And that's why my phone is always ready to get a call, because I don't think I can do much worse than some of our current pitchers. But that's part of the fun. And Skyler, you know a lot of this because you told me about it. What has Brian Fuentes done post-baseball career?
Well, first and foremost, he is a Guys Grocery Games champion on Food Network. Because I think they did some random MLB All-Stars type of competition where they paired up former players with a actual professional cook, and Brian Fuentes coasted to the end and got the win with his partner. So he's got that on his resume.
Is that a cooking show or is that a shopping show?
It's the cooking show.
It's the cooking
competition.
Okay. Because I think when I remember seeing clips of that and thinking, man, if he was on Supermarket Sweep, he'd just be flinging those DiGiorno pizzas into his cart, and it would be unfair to have him on. That's why you can't do a Celebrity Rockies Supermarket Sweep. You could do that.
He's also a very successful almond farmer in California.
Yeah.
That fact is, dare I say, nuts. The other thing that I'll say about Fuentes that I liked, and this almost veers off from being that underdog guy, is, so Fuentes, in that 2005 season, he's the Rockies' lone representative, and you go, oh yeah, someone's got to do it, and Fuentes was like the default guy, obviously in 06 and 07, because they didn't really make that postseason push until late. You go, actually, that's not true at all. They had two representatives in 2006 and 2007. Matt Holliday was in both of those. So it wasn't that, it was like, well, all right, we like Fuentes, or, he's got the most saves. He's doing all right. Let's just put him in. It was like, no, Holliday's in. He deserves to be on this roster. And so does Brian Fuentes. So we're going to find room for both of those guys. So, I like that aspect of it too. It wasn't just by default. It was, no, he unequivocally earned it. And sometimes, look, you can have a lone representative that deserves to make a team and just happens to be the only one. But when there's another guy there along with you, it really kind of hammers home that point of like, no, you're an all-star. And it wasn't just out of, well, the rules are the rules, so one guy has to get in. He absolutely earned all three of those spots, but in particular, the final two in 06 and 07 with Colorado.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most definitely. Before we wrap up here, I'll ask Patrick a couple questions. He is covering the Rockies. He's there at all the games, covering them day after day, for better or for worse. But from what it sounds like, he's enjoying it quite a bit this season. But Patrick, overall, what's kind of been the best part about your job of just covering the Rockies, being there among the players, talking to them? What's, I guess, been your favorite part about everything that you've been able to do now?
Well, even when baseball's bad, it's good, right? There's no such thing as baseball being bad. If you can do it in any capacity, as your job, as your career, whatever it is, like it's great. I mean, shoot, if I ran a little league, I'd be incredibly happy and be overjoyed. So it's been great just being able to go to the ballpark, see these guys. The All-Star break kind of allowed for a little bit of a reset for me to kind of recontextualize the season. Obviously, a lot right now has to be about the trade deadline and what's going to happen here now that we're less than 2 weeks away from that, and what kind of moves will be made. But I think right now the second half really becomes a lot more about keeping an eye on Ezequiel Tovar. Like I think we all know he's the future cornerstone of this team. Just as of the other night, he was tied with Ryan McMahon for the RBI lead on the team, and we forget this is a 21-year-old kid who just had himself a kid. So like he's impressive, and for all of us that can remember, unfortunately, the pain of Nolan Arenado getting traded, and the same thing for Troy Tulowitzki, and say, man, I just thought this guy was going to be around forever. We really need to appreciate these kind of players, and I think everyone did appreciate Tulowitzki and Arenado when they were here, and many other players as well. And we still have a long way to go with Ezequiel Tovar here. We just started. Believe me, I'm not talking about him getting traded away just yet. We got about 2 more years before we have to consider having that conversation. But right now, appreciate it early and say, hey, man, this is what it was like with Tulo in 2007, or Jason Jennings in 2002, and a couple other of those guys who were immediately like, you know what? It's not just Rockies fans that are paying attention to this player and noticing how gifted they are and how bright their future is. It's all of baseball. It's all of the US and Canada paying attention to Tovar as well. So I feel like that's a really big one. And then there's other players that are still trying to establish themselves going forward, like Jake Bird and Justin Lawrence in the bullpen, and Brenton Doyle and Nolan Jones in the outfield. Like it's really important to watch those guys, see what you've got. And then on the starting pitching side, Connor Siebold has been another one of those guys where it seems like he's a guy that can go out there and do it. Seeing him, perform in Boston, his former team, at Fenway Park with that crowd is obviously very promising. We've seen Noah Davis do that. So a lot of it is going to be about, what these young guys can do going forward. And even when baseball is bad, like a 100-loss season bad, it's still baseball. It's still really good. There's still something that can happen on any given night that you wouldn't expect to see. And putting aside the fact that, hey, the Yankees were in town last weekend, and even though Aaron Judge wasn't playing, it's the Yankees. So, okay, that's nice. And then the Rockies go out and do something that only 3 teams have ever done since 1920. And that's hit 2 go-ahead home runs, 8th inning or later, trail by 2 or more runs twice, and have a walk-off home run. So it's baseball. You go to the game, and you just don't know what's going to happen. Sometimes it could be good for your team. Other times it can be bad, but if you love baseball, it's always going to be good.
Mm-hmm. Well said. One last question. Patrick, you've got a wall of baseball cards behind you. What is your favorite card you've got on that wall behind you?
Well, now I got to think about this one here. Well, I looked right at it, so it's got to be the Mark McGwire. So this is the 1987 Topps. I have the entire set in uncut sheets, and so this was something that my wife was redecorating my little office, Pat's Sports Room. Lame title, but it's lame intentionally. So this is Pat's Sports Room, and so she put one of those sheets in there, and noticed a lot of my favorite players in there. There's a Bonds one that's there, Jose Canseco, a lot of really good players, and then all the way at the top is actually a Bud Black card when he was on the Royals. So that had to be the one that she put in a frame. So 87 Topps is my favorite. Just that wood grain. It came with the nasty stick of bubble gum. I think in Seattle they have a bubble gum wall, and there was someone doing content where they were trying to chew a gum in 2023 from back in 1987 to chew it to see if it could stick. And it was like 1 out of every 10 people could actually get that gum to stick. I would be interested in trying that myself. But 87 Topps was like one of the first cards that I can just remember opening up, them being affordable, and just getting me acclimated to all the players and what they look like. Obviously it's pre-internet, and seeing all the different jerseys and reading the backs of the cards with the fun facts and looking at statistics. And it was, for the adults who could read newspapers at the time, For kids, a baseball card is the next closest thing. You get to see what a player looks like. You see the spelling of their name. You learn about their position. You learn about the teams they play for, and it's really a beginner's version of reading longer content in a sense. I just thought of that right now, but it's really true when it comes to baseball cards.
Yeah. It was baseball reference before baseball reference.
It was for sure. Yeah. It's still weird now looking at baseball cards because I'll still rip open a pack, each new season of Topps, since they're pretty much the only game in town now. But they'll have like OPS on there or OPS plus, and it's like, what's his batting average? Like, I know, like, I don't really care about batting average as much. I know the value of OPS, but even still, it just feels different to not have, batting average. And give me all the counting stats. All right, sure. If you want to show me 0 triples, going down for 10 years in a player's career, I would rather see that. I'd rather know that than, think about what their B WAR is necessarily, or how many defensive run saves they have. That's one place I probably lean more traditional than anything.
Well, that's because Dustin's got he's got his big baseball collection or his card collection stashed away. He pulled out one day. We're looking at all his old Rockies cards through the 90s and stuff. So there's an idea for you, Dustin. Right behind Patrick's head, you can stick them in a big frame.
There you go. Do you have a favorite card, Dustin, or a favorite set?
I have this. I don't even know where I got it. It's a Cal Ripken Jr. card that came from like a Purina dog food something. It is so randomly weird. I don't think it's worth anything, but I think that was one of the first cards that I ever got, and I was like, it's so unique. And Cal Ripken Jr. was my idol player as a kid, when I started playing baseball. So that's probably, it wasn't even. It's like I don't even think he's wearing an official Orioles uniform. It's like one of those, like, it's the colors, but there's no trademark on it. But yeah, that was one of them.
In the mid to late 80s, baby boomers were having kids, and so they were buying cards, and that's when there was just a million sets: Upper Deck, Score, Donruss, Fleer Ultra. Like, it got crazy. And yeah, to your point, like, hey, buy a box of Purina dog food and you get a baseball card in it, or Kellogg's cereal. So there's all these weird, there'd be like decks of playing cards that would have players on and stuff. So if you go on eBay, I wouldn't be surprised if you could get like an uncut sheet of that Purina set. There's probably like 8 to 12 cards, and you can actually get a whole set of all of them, slap it up in a frame. Yeah. Now you know what to get Dustin for the holidays or for his birthday.
There you go. Be awesome. I think we'll close out here. And Patrick, again, we appreciate you hopping on, sharing your tidbits and experiences. And it definitely makes the show better when it's not just Dustin and I. And we appreciate you spending the time here with us today.
Well, thanks for having me on, and I'll, I don't know if you'll have me back, but if you do, we'll tease maybe a longer conversation about Quentin McCracken and Rex Brothers, because I think they would be 1A, 1B right there next with, we can go pretty deep. Look, it's the Rockies, so they have some fun players. But thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Keep crushing it, Skyler, Dustin, Evan. Shout out to you out there. I love everything that you guys are doing, and the family over at Purple Row. Appreciate you guys as well, because if we don't have the Rockies community, it's it's hard to have much else. So I appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, no problem. We appreciate all your support and everything that you contribute as well, covering the Rockies. We'll throw it to you as well. You can throw out your pitch and promote whatever it is over at DNVR. What's cooking over there?
That's it. Go to thednvr.com. Tons of free content, not just on the Rockies, but all the great coverage of the Nuggets here, the NBA champions, Avs, Broncos, CU, CSU, you name it. We've got it covered there at thednvr.com. We've got memberships too for diehards that unlocks a lot of different content. Diehards only Discord, but you can also listen to the podcast 5 days a week. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, we go live on YouTube on the DNVR Sports channel. We're doing 2 post games, on the getaway day, so Sunday, and then usually Wednesday or Thursday later in the afternoon, and then at 1:00 usually on like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. is where you can listen to myself and Susie Hunter on Twitter. You can follow us at DNVR_Rockies, and I'm at Patrick D. Lyons on Twitter.
Awesome. Yeah, there's always a lot of good stuff, tidbits, and that's how we get the breaking news of whatever's happening to the Rocky scoreboard operator. The drama going on there. You can also find us on Twitter at Every Rockie Ever, where you can always go back through the backlogs and see all the players. I'm pretty caught up on every former player. I usually wait until a guy leaves the organization before we send in new guys, or I jump the gun and send Fernando Abad thinking, oh, he'll never be back. And then he comes back. Same with Ty Block. So you can always go back and through there and also interact. Let us know who else you want us to talk about. You can find me over at sideline_crowd, writing articles and also talking jokes, whatever. And you can follow Rocky Mountain Rooftop at Rocky, ROCKY, MTN Rooftop for all of our podcasts for these episodes, as well as the Affected by Altitude podcast. And you can follow Dustin over at Mr. T Spanish on Twitter and TikTok, where he's kicking cans into trash cans as the school year is getting closer.
Oh, yeah. I got to start getting into shape. Got to be back to work in 2 weeks.
Yeah. So we always appreciate you joining with us. Again, we'll definitely have you back, Patrick. We would love to talk about Quentin McCracken and Rex brothers for our inside family joke. But that'll do it here for Every Rockie Ever. Until next time, we'll see ya. I'm Skyler. That's Dustin. Patrick Lyons has been joining us, and we'll see you next time. Go Rockies.